Sometimes the person everyone underestimates becomes the hero when it matters most. In a small county sheriff's department, where respect was earned through years of experience and tough cases, Deputy Marcus Chun was seen as nothing more than a college boy playing cop. His fellow officers snickered behind his back, calling him professor and questioning whether he belonged on the streets or behind a desk. But on one fateful night, when bullets flew and lives hung in the balance, this mock deputy would prove that courage doesn't come from a badge or years of service. It comes from the heart. This is the true story of how a young man who was ridiculed for his gentle nature and academic background became the unlikely hero who saved his commander's life, earning the respect he never demanded but always deserved. Marcus Chun adjusted his bulletproof vest for the third time that morning, his hands trembling slightly as he prepared for another day that would likely bring more humiliation than heroism. At 25 years old, with a criminal justice degree from the State University and barely 8 months on the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, Marcus had quickly learned that his education meant little to the veteran officers who saw him as an outsider trying to play in their world. The locker room buzzed with the usual morning chatter as deputies prepared for their shifts. Marcus kept his head down, methodically checking his equipment while listening to the conversations around him. Deputy Jake Morrison, a 15-year veteran with arms covered in tattoos and a voice like gravel, was regaling the group with another story from his weekend adventures. So there I was, face to face with this 200-pound drunk who thought he could take on the whole bar. Morrison laughed, his audience hanging on every word. One look at these hands, and he decided maybe jail wasn't so bad after all. The other deputies roared with laughter, but Marcus remained focused on his gear. He had learned early in his tenure that trying to join these conversations only invited mockery. His attempts at camaraderie had been met with eye rolls and comments about book learning versus street smarts. "Hey, Professor," Morrison called out, using the nickname that had stuck since Marcus's first week. "You got any textbook wisdom on handling bar fights? Maybe we should form a study group." The laughter that followed felt like needles in Marcus's chest. He forced a smile and continued organizing his belt, pretending the comment didn't bother him. Detective Sarah Williams, one of the few people who had shown him any kindness, shot Morrison a disapproving look, but said nothing. Even she seemed reluctant to defend him too openly. As Marcus closed his locker, Sergeant Tom Bradley entered the room. At 52 years old, Bradley was a legend in the department. 28 years of service, countless commendations, and a reputation for being both tough and fair. He commanded respect simply by walking into a room, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere from casual to professional. "Morning briefing in 5 minutes," Bradley announced, his gravelly voice cutting through the chatter. "We've got some developments on the East Side drug situation that everyone needs to hear." The deputies began filing out, but Bradley lingered, his eyes settling on Marcus. There was something unreadable in his expression, neither approval nor disapproval, just careful observation. "Chun," Bradley said quietly, "walk with me." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Individual conversations with the sergeant usually meant one thing: trouble. He followed Bradley down the hallway, his mind racing through everything he might have done wrong in recent days. They stopped near a window overlooking the parking lot. Bradley leaned against the wall, studying Marcus with the same intensity he brought to interrogating suspects. 8 months on the job," Bradley said, not really asking. "How are you finding it?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "It's challenging, sir. Every day is a learning experience." Bradley nodded slowly. "The other deputies giving you a hard time?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus knew this was a moment that could define his future in the department. He could complain about the treatment he'd received, but that would only confirm what many already believed, that he was weak and didn't belong. Or he could handle it like he believed a real cop should. "Nothing I can't handle, sir," Marcus replied, meeting Bradley's gaze. Something shifted in the sergeant's expression. Not quite approval, but perhaps a glimmer of respect. "Good," Bradley said simply, "because it's about to get a lot harder." The briefing room was packed with deputies, detectives, and support staff. Marcus took a seat in the back, as had become his habit. From there, he could observe without drawing attention to himself. The room buzzed with speculation about what developments Bradley had mentioned. Bradley moved to the front of the room, commanding immediate silence. Behind him, a large board displayed photos, maps, and what looked like surveillance images. "For the past 6 months, we've been tracking a drug operation centered around the East Side Industrial District," Bradley began, pointing to locations on the map. What started as small-time dealing has grown into something much bigger. We're talking major distribution, weapons, and connections that reach well beyond our county. He clicked a remote, and new images appeared on the screen. Marcus recognized some of the faces from wanted posters around the station. The leader of this operation is Vincent Torres, Bradley continued, pointing to a photo of a man in his 30s with cold eyes and numerous tattoos. Torres has a history of violence and has made it clear that he considers law enforcement the enemy. Intelligence suggests they're planning something big, possibly within the next few weeks. Deputy Morrison raised his hand. What kind of something big, Sarge? Bradley's expression darkened. The kind that could put a lot of drugs on the street and a lot of cops in a hospital. Or worse. The room grew tense. These weren't desk-riding administrators. These were experienced officers who had seen their share of dangerous situations. If Bradley was concerned, they all should be. We're implementing increased patrols in the area, working with narcotics, and coordinating with federal agencies, Bradley continued. Everyone needs to be extra alert. These aren't street corner dealers we're dealing with anymore. As Bradley outlined the specifics of the operation, Marcus found himself studying the photos and maps with intense focus. His academic background had included extensive study of criminal organizations and their methods. While his colleagues saw book learning as irrelevant, Marcus understood patterns and behaviors that might not be obvious to someone relying solely on experience. Something about the locations bothered him. The distribution points were spread across a wide area, but there was a logic to their placement that suggested careful planning. Someone with real intelligence was running this operation, not just street-level thugs looking to make quick money. After the briefing, as deputies filed out discussing assignments and strategies, Marcus lingered behind. He approached the board, studying the information more closely. See something interesting, Professor? Morrison's voice dripped with sarcasm as he appeared beside Marcus. Maybe, Marcus replied quietly, not taking his eyes off the map. These locations aren't random. Morrison glanced at the board dismissively. Dealers set up shop where they can make money. Doesn't take a college degree to figure that out. But look at the pattern, Marcus insisted, pointing to various marked locations. They're not just choosing profitable areas. They're positioning themselves to control traffic flow in and out of the district. It's strategic. Everything's strategic to you college boys, Morrison laughed. Sometimes a drug dealer is just a drug dealer. As Morrison walked away, still chuckling, Marcus remained focused on the board. His instincts told him there was more to this operation than anyone realized. The careful positioning, the timing, the intelligence behind the organization, it all pointed to something bigger than a local drug ring. Detective Williams approached, having observed the exchange. Don't let Morrison get to you, she said quietly. He gives everyone a hard time at first. Marcus appreciated her kindness, but he knew Morrison's treatment of him went beyond normal hazing. There was genuine contempt in the veteran deputy's attitude, a belief that Marcus didn't belong and never would. I just think there's more to this situation than we're seeing, Marcus said, gesturing toward the board. Williams studied the information for a moment. Maybe, but be careful about pushing theories too hard too fast. Around here, you need to prove yourself on the street before anyone will listen to what you learned in books. Her advice was well-meaning, but Marcus felt the familiar frustration of being dismissed before anyone had really listened to what he had to say. He had spent 4 years studying criminal justice, not just memorizing textbooks, but understanding the psychology and methodology behind criminal organizations. Yet none of that seemed to matter to his colleagues. As he left the station for his patrol assignment, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the glass doors. He looked young, almost boyish despite his attempts to project authority. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his equipment meticulously organized, but something in his posture betrayed his uncertainty. The other deputies carried themselves with the confidence that came from years of proving themselves. Marcus was still trying to figure out where he fit in this world. His patrol car was older than some of the others, with high mileage and a radio that occasionally crackled with static. As he settled into the driver's seat, Marcus tried to shake off the morning's events and focus on the day ahead. He had a job to do, regardless of what his colleagues thought of him. The East Side District was a mix of industrial buildings, small businesses, and residential areas that had seen better days. As Marcus drove through the streets, he kept the morning's briefing in mind, looking for anything unusual or suspicious. The area had a different feel than other parts of the county. More tension in the air, more watchful eyes following his patrol car. He stopped at a convenience store where the owner, Mrs. Rodriguez, had reported suspicious activity the previous week. The elderly woman emerged from behind the counter as he entered, relief visible on her face. "Officer Chun, I'm so glad to see you," she said in accented English. "There have been more strangers around lately. They don't cause trouble, but they watch everything." Marcus pulled out his notebook. Mrs. Rodriguez had become one of his regular contacts, someone willing to share information about changes in the neighborhood. Unlike some of his colleagues, Marcus had learned that listening to community members often provided better intelligence than aggressive enforcement. "Can you describe these strangers?" he asked. "Different men, but always well-dressed. Too well-dressed for this neighborhood. They come in by something small, but their eyes see everything." Yesterday, one asked about delivery schedules for the businesses across the street. Marcus made careful notes. This fit the pattern of organized surveillance that suggested the drug operation was preparing for something significant. While his colleagues might dismiss such observations as paranoia from a nervous shop owner, Marcus recognized the signs of criminal intelligence gathering. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I want you to call the station immediately if you see these men again. Don't try to observe them or ask questions. Just call." The sincerity in his voice seemed to reassure her. "You believe me? Some officers think I worry too much." "Your observations are valuable," Marcus told her truthfully. "People who live and work in a community notice changes that outsiders might miss." As he left the store, Marcus reflected on the difference between his approach and that of many veteran officers. Where they relied on authority and intimidation, he tried to build relationships and gather information. It wasn't the dramatic, action-packed policing that earned respect in the locker room, but it was effective. His radio crackled with a call about a domestic disturbance several blocks away. As Marcus responded, he passed the industrial area where several of the suspected drug operation locations were marked on the morning's map. Everything appeared normal, but he made mental notes about the buildings, access routes, and activity patterns. The domestic disturbance call turned out to be a neighbor dispute over noise that was easily resolved through conversation rather than confrontation. As Marcus mediated between the parties, he noticed how different his methods were from what he'd observed from other officers. Where they might have issued citations or made arrests to assert authority, Marcus focused on understanding the underlying problems and finding solutions. It was effective policing, but it wasn't the kind that generated war stories for the locker room. There were no dramatic arrests, no shows of physical force, no moments that would impress colleagues who measure police work by how tough an officer appeared. Marcus was beginning to understand that his approach, while successful in resolving problems, might never earn him the respect he wanted from his peers. As his shift continued, Marcus found himself thinking about Sergeant Bradley's words, "It's about to get a lot harder." There had been something in the veteran officer's tone that suggested he wasn't just talking about the drug operation. Bradley seemed to be preparing him for challenges that went beyond criminal investigations. The radio interrupted his thoughts with another call, this time for a traffic accident on the main highway. As Marcus responded, he passed Deputy Morrison heading in the opposite direction. Morrison's wave was perfunctory, the gesture of someone acknowledging a colleague out of obligation rather than respect. Marcus had hoped that time would improve his relationships with fellow officers, that proving himself through good work would eventually earn their acceptance. But 8 months in, he was beginning to wonder if some barriers were too high to overcome. The culture of the sheriff's department valued certain types of experience and certain approaches to police work. His background and methods seemed to mark him as fundamentally different, perhaps permanently so. The accident scene required careful documentation and traffic control. As Marcus worked, directing vehicles around the damaged cars while waiting for tow trucks, he noticed how other drivers responded to his authority. They followed his directions, respected his uniform, and trusted his competence. Outside the sheriff's department, his badge carried real weight. It was a reminder that the opinions of his colleagues, while important to his daily work life, didn't define his worth as a police officer. The community he served seemed to appreciate his approach, even if fellow officers did not. Mrs. Rodriguez trusted him with important information. Accident victims felt comfortable sharing details with him. Citizens stopped him on patrol to discuss neighborhood concerns. Perhaps, Marcus thought as he completed his accident report, earning respect was less about changing how his colleagues saw him and more about continuing to do good police work regardless of their opinions. The job itself, protecting and serving the community, was what mattered most. As his shift ended, Marcus returned to the station for paperwork and equipment checkout. The locker room was quieter now, with most day shift officers having departed and evening officers not yet arrived. In the relative peace, he reflected on the day's events and the ongoing challenges he faced. 8 months ago, when he'd first put on the uniform, Marcus had imagined that competence and dedication would quickly earn him acceptance among his colleagues. The reality was more complex. Respect in law enforcement seemed to require not just good work, but the right kind of good work performed in ways that aligned with established culture. But as Marcus secured his equipment and prepared to leave, he remained committed to his approach. He would continue building relationships in the community, gathering intelligence through conversation rather than confrontation, and solving problems through understanding rather than force. Whether or not it earned him respect from colleagues, it was the kind of policing that made a real difference. The next morning would bring new challenges, new calls for service, and new opportunities to prove himself. Marcus Chun might be mocked by his fellow deputies, but he was determined to be the best officer he could be, regardless of what anyone else thought. Little did he know that very soon, his quiet competence and dedication would be tested in ways that would forever change how his colleagues and his commander saw him. 2 weeks after the briefing about the East Side drug operation, Marcus Chun had developed what he privately called his intelligence map. Using his off-duty time, he had carefully plotted not just the known locations from the official investigation, but additional observations gathered through his community contacts and patrol observations. The pattern that emerged painted a picture far more sophisticated than anyone in the department seemed to realize. Mrs. Rodriguez had called 3 more times about well-dressed strangers conducting surveillance. Marcus had documented each incident, noting times, descriptions, and the specific businesses or locations that seemed to interest the observers. When he cross-referenced this information with delivery schedules, shift changes at local factories, and traffic patterns, a disturbing picture emerged. The drug operation wasn't just selling narcotics. They were mapping the entire district for what appeared to be a much larger criminal enterprise. Marcus had tried to share his observations with Detective Williams, but even she seemed skeptical of his detailed analysis. "You might be reading too much into coincidences," she had said gently. "Sometimes drug dealers are just opportunistic, not strategic masterminds." The dismissal stung, but Marcus continued gathering information. His academic background had taught him the importance of data collection and pattern analysis, skills that seemed undervalued by his more experienced colleagues. While they relied on informants and traditional investigative methods, Marcus was building a comprehensive picture through careful observation and community engagement. On a gray Tuesday morning, Marcus was patrolling the industrial district when he noticed something that made him pull over and reach for his radio. A white panel van was parked behind one of the warehouses marked on the department's suspect location list. What caught his attention wasn't the van itself, but the fact that it had been in the exact same position 3 days earlier when he'd driven past. Vehicles didn't typically remain stationary for days in an area where parking enforcement was strict and theft common. Marcus parked his patrol car where he could observe the van without being obvious and began documenting what he saw. The warehouse appeared abandoned from the front, with boarded windows and faded for lease signs. But from his position, Marcus could see evidence of recent activity. Tire tracks in the dirt, cigarette butts that hadn't weathered multiple rainstorms, and, most tellingly, a small security camera mounted discreetly under the building's eave. Marcus was photographing the scene when his radio crackled with Morrison's voice. "Unit 23 to Unit 17. What's your location, Professor?" The mocking nickname over official radio channels made Marcus wince. "Unit 17. Conducting routine patrol in the industrial district. Copy that. Try not to arrest any textbooks while you're out there." The laughter from other units that followed Morrison's comment was audible through the radio. Marcus felt his face flush with embarrassment and anger, but he maintained professional composure. "Unit 17, clear." As Marcus continued his observation, a black sedan approached the warehouse. 2 men emerged, both fitting the description Mrs. Rodriguez had provided of the well-dressed strangers. They moved with purpose, scanning the area before approaching a side door that Marcus hadn't noticed from his previous vantage points. This was significant. Marcus reached for his radio to call for backup, then hesitated. What exactly would he report? Suspicious behavior near a warehouse wasn't enough for a search warrant or arrests. His colleagues would likely see this as another example of his overactive imagination and academic theorizing. Instead, Marcus decided to document everything carefully and build a stronger case before involving others. He photographed the sedan's license plate, noted the time and date, and carefully observed the men's behavior and physical descriptions. After 20 minutes, the men returned to their car and departed, but not before one of them spoke into what appeared to be a radio or cell phone. Marcus waited another hour, but saw no further activity. As he prepared to leave, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The small security camera under the eave had moved. It was now pointed directly at his patrol car. Someone had been watching him watch them. Marcus drove away with forced casualness, but his mind was racing. The level of sophistication he'd just witnessed suggested that the Torres organization was far more advanced than the department realized. They had surveillance systems, coordinated communications, and the discipline to maintain operational security. This wasn't a street-level drug ring. It was a serious criminal enterprise. Back at the station, Marcus spent his lunch break researching the warehouse's ownership records and permit history. What he discovered added another layer to his concerns. The building had changed hands 3 times in the past year, each time through shell companies that were difficult to trace. The current owner of record was a business entity that existed only on paper, with an address that led to a vacant office building downtown. These weren't coincidences or the random activities of opportunistic criminals. Someone with significant resources and planning capabilities was orchestrating something major in the East Side District, and the official investigation was only seeing the surface. Marcus printed copies of the ownership records and his surveillance photos, organizing them in a file he kept in his patrol car. He knew he needed to present this information to Sergeant Bradley, but he also knew how it would likely be received. His colleagues already saw him as an overeager rookie who thought too much and acted too little. Bringing forward theories based on careful analysis rather than dramatic arrests would only reinforce their negative opinions. That afternoon, Marcus was dispatched to a minor traffic violation near the warehouse district. As he wrote the citation, the driver, a middle-aged man with nervous energy, kept glancing toward the industrial area. "Officer, can I ask you something?" the man said as Marcus handed back his license. "What's on your mind?" "I work at the auto parts store over there." The man pointed toward a building Marcus recognized from his surveillance map. "There's been weird stuff happening lately. Guys in suits asking questions about our delivery schedules, wanting to know what time we close, stuff like that. My boss says ignore it, but it's got all the employees spooked." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. This was independent confirmation of the pattern he'd been tracking. "What kind of questions specifically?" "They wanted to know how many people work there at night, whether we have security cameras when the last person leaves. Real specific stuff, you know? Like they were planning something." As Marcus took notes, he realized this was exactly the kind of human intelligence that could break the case open. While the official investigation was focused on tracking known dealers and monitoring traditional drug activity, the real threat was a comprehensive criminal operation that was mapping the entire district for reasons that went far beyond narcotics distribution. "Sir, I'm going to give you my card," Marcus said, handing the man his contact information. "If anyone else approaches your workplace with questions like these, I want you to call me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself, just call." The man pocketed the card with obvious relief. "You think this is serious?" "I think you're right to be concerned," Marcus replied honestly. "And I think you should trust your instincts about staying safe." As Marcus returned to his patrol car, he found himself facing a difficult decision. The evidence he was gathering pointed to a criminal operation that posed a real threat to the community, but presenting his findings would require going against department culture and risking further ridicule from colleagues who already questioned his judgment. On the other hand, if he was right about the scope and sophistication of the Torres organization, people could get hurt. The auto parts store employees' information suggested they were planning something that required detailed knowledge of local businesses, security measures, and personnel schedules. That sounded like preparation for robbery, extortion, or worse. Marcus decided to approach Detective Williams first. As one of the few people who had shown him any kindness, she might be willing to listen to his concerns and help him present the information to Sergeant Bradley in a way that would be taken seriously. He found Williams in the detective division, reviewing case files at her desk. The area was quieter than the main squad room, with better lighting and fewer distractions. Williams looked up as he approached, her expression friendly but slightly curious about why a patrol deputy was seeking her out. "Marcus, What brings you to the detective division? I've been gathering some information about the East Side situation. Marcus began carefully. I think there might be more to it than we're seeing in the official investigation. Williams gestured for him to sit down. What kind of information? Marcus pulled out his file and began presenting his findings systematically. He started with Mrs. Rodriguez's observations about surveillance, moved through the warehouse incident, and concluded with the auto parts store employee's report. As he spoke, he watched Williams's expression change from polite interest to genuine concern. "This is good police work," she said when he finished. "Detailed, careful, and well documented. But, Marcus, you need to understand how this is going to be received by some people in the department. I know they think I overanalyze everything," Marcus replied. "But this isn't academic theory. These are concrete observations pointing to a real threat." Williams studied the photographs and documents he'd assembled. "The problem isn't the quality of your work. The problem is that you're a rookie presenting a theory that suggests our experienced detectives and federal partners have missed something important. That's not going to go over well with everyone." Marcus felt frustration rising in his chest. "So I should ignore evidence because it might hurt people's feelings?" "No," Williams said firmly. "You should present it, but you need to do it strategically. Let me review this material more carefully, and then we'll figure out the best way to get it to Sergeant Bradley and the task force." As Williams examined his documentation more thoroughly, Marcus reflected on the absurdity of his situation. He had potentially uncovered a major criminal threat, but his biggest challenge was figuring out how to share that information without offending colleagues who valued experience over evidence. "Marcus," Williams said after several minutes of review, "this is solid work. Really solid. The pattern you've identified is concerning, and the level of detail suggests serious planning on their part. We need to get this to Bradley immediately." The validation felt good, but Marcus knew the real test would come when they presented the information to the sergeant. Bradley was fair, but he was also a veteran officer who valued proven methods and established protocols. Marcus's community-based intelligence gathering and analytical approach were outside the department's normal investigative procedures. "There's something else," Marcus said, pulling out his latest notes. "I think they know we're watching them. The camera at the warehouse moved to track my patrol car. If this operation is as sophisticated as I believe, they're probably monitoring police activity and adjusting their plans accordingly." Williams's expression grew more serious. "That changes everything. If they have counter-surveillance capabilities, it means our traditional investigative methods might be compromised. They could be feeding us false information or staying ahead of our moves." As they prepared to approach Sergeant Bradley with Marcus's findings, both officers understood they were about to challenge the department's entire approach to the case. If Marcus was right, the East Side situation was far more dangerous than anyone realized, and time might be running out to prevent whatever the Torres organization was planning. The late afternoon briefing room was nearly empty when Williams requested a few minutes with Sergeant Bradley. Marcus felt nervous as they waited for the veteran officer to review his materials. Bradley's reputation for thorough analysis and fair judgment was well established, but Marcus knew that even fair-minded supervisors could be skeptical of theories that came from inexperienced officers. Bradley entered the room with his usual commanding presence, settling into a chair across from Marcus and Williams. His expression was neutral as Williams began explaining why they had requested the meeting. "Sergeant, Deputy Chun has been conducting some independent intelligence gathering related to the East Side investigation. We think his findings deserve your attention." Bradley turned his focus to Marcus, and for a moment, the young deputy felt like he was back in college, defending a thesis to skeptical professors. But this wasn't academic theory. This was real police work with real consequences. "Show me what you've got, Deputy," Bradley said simply. Marcus began presenting his findings methodically, starting with the community contacts and moving through his surveillance observations. He watched Bradley's face carefully, looking for signs of dismissal or skepticism, but the sergeant's expression remained professionally neutral. As Marcus described the warehouse incident and the auto parts store employee's report, Bradley began asking specific questions about times, dates, and locations. His queries weren't challenges. They were the careful probing of an experienced investigator evaluating new information. "You believe this organization is conducting comprehensive surveillance of the district for purposes that go beyond drug distribution," Bradley summarized when Marcus finished. "Yes, sir. The pattern suggests they're mapping the area for a large-scale operation that requires detailed knowledge of security measures, personnel schedules, and access routes. Bradley studied the photographs and documentation for several long minutes. The room was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and distant radio chatter from the dispatch center. "This is good work, Chun," Bradley finally said. "Thorough, well-documented, and concerning. If your analysis is correct, we're dealing with a much more sophisticated threat than our current investigation assumes." Marcus felt a rush of relief and validation. After weeks of being dismissed by colleagues, having his work recognized by someone of Bradley's stature meant everything. However, Bradley continued, "We need to be careful about how we proceed. If this organization has counter-surveillance capabilities, any obvious changes in our approach could alert them that we're onto their broader plans." Williams leaned forward. "What do you recommend, Sergeant?" Bradley was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing options. "We need to expand the investigation without appearing to expand it. Chun, I want you to continue your community-based intelligence gathering, but coordinate with Detective Williams to ensure we're not duplicating efforts or creating security risks." Marcus nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. But I want to be clear about something," Bradley added, his tone becoming more serious. "If you're right about the sophistication of this operation, you could be putting yourself in danger. These aren't street dealers who will run when they see a badge. If they're planning something major and they see you as a threat, they might decide to eliminate that threat." The warning sent a chill down Marcus's spine. In all his careful analysis and investigation, he hadn't fully considered that his activities might have made him a target. The moved security camera suddenly took on a much more ominous meaning. "I understand, sir," Marcus replied, though he wasn't entirely sure he understood the full implications of what Bradley was telling him. "Good. Williams, I want you to brief the task force leadership on these findings, but keep the source information compartmentalized. If we have a leak or if this organization has law enforcement contacts, I don't want Chin's identity compromised." As they concluded the meeting, Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. His work was finally being taken seriously, but the validation came with the sobering realization that he might have stumbled into something far more dangerous than he had imagined. Walking back to the patrol division, Marcus reflected on how much his situation had changed in a single afternoon. For months, he had been seen as an over-analytical rookie who didn't understand real police work. Now, suddenly, his careful investigation was driving strategy decisions for a major case. But with recognition came responsibility and risk. If his analysis was wrong, he would face professional embarrassment and potentially damage an important investigation. If he was right, he had uncovered a criminal operation sophisticated enough to threaten both the community and law enforcement personnel who got in their way. As Marcus prepared for his evening patrol, he realized that everything was about to change. The mocking and dismissal from colleagues seemed less important now than ensuring that whatever the Torres organization was planning never came to fruition. He had moved from the periphery of the investigation to its center, and there would be no going back to anonymous patrol work and departmental insignificance. The young deputy who had been ridiculed as professor was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous knowledge comes not from textbooks, but from understanding patterns that others have missed. And sometimes being right about something important is far more perilous than being wrong about everything else. 3 days after his meeting with Sergeant Bradley, Marcus Chin found himself operating in a completely different world within the sheriff's department. Where he had once been relegated to routine patrol duties and dismissed by colleagues, he was now part of a specialized task force operation that required him to maintain his normal patrol schedule while secretly gathering intelligence on what had been designated as a major criminal enterprise. The change in how he was treated was subtle, but noticeable. Detective Williams now included him in informal briefings about task force developments. Bradley acknowledged him with nods that conveyed respect rather than mere tolerance. Even some of the other deputies seemed to sense that something had shifted, though none of them knew exactly what. Morrison, however, remained skeptical and increasingly hostile about Marcus's apparent rise in status within the department. "I hear the professor's been playing detective," Morrison commented loudly during morning roll call, ensuring his voice carried across the briefing room. "Hope he's not letting all that book learning go to his head." The comment drew a few chuckles from other deputies, but Marcus noticed that the laughter was less enthusiastic than it had been weeks earlier. Something in the atmosphere had changed, and While Morrison might not understand what was happening, others seemed to sense that Marcus was no longer just an easy target for ridicule. Sergeant Bradley entered the briefing room and immediately commanded attention. As he began the daily assignments and updates, Marcus noticed that the East Side District Patrol routes had been subtly reorganized. Where previously multiple deputies had covered the area on rotating schedules, Marcus was now assigned to consistent coverage of the industrial district during specific time periods. To anyone not familiar with the investigation, it would appear to be routine patrol assignment. But Marcus understood that he was being positioned to continue his intelligence gathering while maintaining plausible cover for his presence in the area. After the briefing, Bradley approached Marcus privately. "Any new developments from your community contacts?" Marcus pulled out his notebook, which had become significantly thicker over the past few days. "Mrs. Rodriguez called yesterday evening. She observed the same white panel van from my warehouse surveillance parked behind her store for over an hour. 2 men were inside, apparently watching foot traffic and noting when different businesses opened and closed." Bradley's expression grew more serious. "Did she get descriptions of the individuals?" "She did better than that," Marcus replied, pulling out a photograph. "She took pictures through her store window. The image quality isn't perfect, but it clearly shows both subjects and the vehicle's license plate." Bradley studied the photograph with obvious surprise. "She took initiative to document suspicious activity without being asked." "Mrs. Rodriguez understands that her neighborhood is under threat," Marcus explained. "She's not just a passive observer anymore. She's become an active intelligence asset. I've been careful to maintain her security while encouraging her to report anything unusual." This was exactly the kind of community engagement that Marcus had been practicing since joining the department, but which had previously been dismissed as too soft or academic by his colleagues. Now, that same approach was generating crucial intelligence for a major investigation. "Excellent work," Bradley said, and Marcus could hear genuine approval in his voice. "What else do you have?" Marcus flipped through several pages of notes. The auto parts store employee called again. "He's identified at least 6 different individuals who have visited local businesses asking similar questions about schedules, security measures, and personnel. I've mapped their movements, and there's a clear pattern of reconnaissance that covers the entire industrial district." As Marcus spread out a hand-drawn map showing the surveillance pattern, Bradley's expression grew increasingly concerned. The reconnaissance wasn't random or limited to suspected drug distribution points. It covered businesses, warehouses, access roads, and even the local police substation. "Chun, this suggests they're planning something that requires comprehensive knowledge of the entire area's security profile," Bradley said quietly. "This isn't drug dealing. This looks like preparation for a major criminal operation." Marcus nodded. "That's my assessment as well, sir. The level of detail and systematic approach suggests significant resources and professional planning capabilities." Bradley studied the map for several more minutes, occasionally asking questions about specific locations and timing. Marcus could see the veteran sergeant's mind working through implications and possibilities, his experience allowing him to recognize threats that might not be obvious to less seasoned investigators. "I'm going to need you to brief the federal task force on these developments," Bradley said finally. "They need to understand what we're really dealing with here." The prospect of presenting his findings to federal agents was both exciting and terrifying for Marcus. These were experienced investigators who worked major cases across multiple jurisdictions. If they took his analysis seriously, it would represent validation at the highest level. If they dismissed his work, it could undermine everything he had accomplished within the department. "When would this briefing take place?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow morning. I want you to prepare a comprehensive presentation that covers all your findings, analysis, and recommendations. This isn't going to be an informal conversation. It's going to be a professional intelligence briefing that could influence federal strategy." As Marcus left the station that day, he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. For months, he had been struggling to prove himself worthy of basic respect from his colleagues. Now, suddenly, federal agents are going to evaluate his work and potentially base major decisions on his analysis. That evening, Marcus spent hours organizing his findings into a coherent presentation. He created maps, timeline charts, and detailed summaries of each piece of intelligence. His academic background proved invaluable in structuring information clearly and persuasively, skills that were finally being recognized as relevant to police work. The next morning's briefing was held in a conference room Marcus had never seen before, located in the administrative section of the sheriff's department. When he arrived, he found not only Sergeant Bradley and Detective Williams, but also two men in suits who introduced themselves as Agent Rodriguez from the DEA and Agent Chun from the FBI. Marcus felt a moment of surprise at sharing a surname with the FBI agent, but quickly focused on the task at hand. This was his opportunity to prove that his careful, methodical approach to investigation could contribute to major law enforcement operations. Deputy Chun has been conducting community-based intelligence gathering that has revealed some concerning patterns. Bradley began by way of introduction. We believe his findings indicate a much more sophisticated threat than our initial assessment suggested. Agent Rodriguez gestured for Marcus to begin. We're interested in seeing what local patrol observations have turned up. Marcus began his presentation systematically, starting with Mrs. Rodriguez's initial reports and progressing through each piece of evidence he had gathered. As he spoke, he watched the federal agent's expressions carefully, looking for signs of engagement or skepticism. Agent Chun, the FBI agent, began asking detailed questions about surveillance methods and community contact protocols. His queries weren't challenges. They were the professional interest of someone who recognized quality intelligence work. This level of systematic reconnaissance suggests significant resources and professional expertise, Agent Chun observed when Marcus finished his presentation. How confident are you in your source network's reliability? Very confident, Marcus replied. These are established community members with legitimate reasons to notice changes in their neighborhood. They're not seeking compensation or trying to settle personal grudges. They're genuinely concerned about threats to their community. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward, studying the maps and photographs Marcus had assembled. If your analysis is correct, we're looking at a criminal organization that's planning something requiring detailed knowledge of local security measures, personnel schedules, and access routes. That profile fits several types of major criminal operations. What kind of operations? Williams asked. Bank robberies, armored car heists, large-scale theft operations, or even terrorist activities, Agent Rodriguez replied grimly. Any criminal enterprise that needs comprehensive area intelligence is planning something significant. The room fell silent as the implications of Marcus's findings became clear. What had started as a local drug investigation was potentially connected to a major criminal threat that could endanger both law enforcement personnel and civilians. Agent Chun addressed Marcus directly. Deputy, your community engagement and analytical work have uncovered a serious threat that might have gone undetected until it was too late to prevent. This is exceptional police work. The validation from federal agents was more meaningful than Marcus had anticipated. For months, he had endured mockery and dismissal from colleagues who questioned whether his academic background and methodical approach had any value in real police work. Now, experienced federal investigators were praising his work and acknowledging its importance to a major case. What's our next step? Bradley asked. Agent Rodriguez consulted his notes. We need to maintain current surveillance patterns while we develop a comprehensive understanding of their operational timeline. If they're conducting this level of reconnaissance, they're probably planning to move soon. Deputy Chun, we'd like you to continue your intelligence gathering, but with enhanced safety protocols, Agent Chun added. If this organization has counter-surveillance capabilities, your activities may have already put you at risk. Marcus felt a chill at the reminder that his investigation had potentially made him a target. But he also felt a sense of purpose that had been missing throughout his time with the sheriff's department. He wasn't just writing traffic citations and responding to minor calls anymore. He was contributing to an investigation that could prevent a major criminal operation. I understand the risks, Marcus replied. But I also understand that this community is depending on us to stop whatever they're planning. After the federal agents departed, Bradley remained in the conference room with Marcus and Williams. The veteran sergeant's expression was thoughtful as he reviewed the notes from the meeting. Chun, I want you to understand something, Bradley said quietly. 6 months ago, you were a rookie deputy that some people in this department didn't think would make it through his probationary period. Today, federal agents are relying on your intelligence work to guide a major investigation. Marcus appreciated the recognition, but he also sensed that Bradley was leading up to something more serious. That kind of rapid change in status creates both opportunities and dangers, Bradley continued. There are people in this department who aren't going to be happy that a rookie has suddenly become central to an important case. And there are people outside this department who might see you as a threat to their operations. Williams nodded in agreement. You need to watch your back on multiple fronts. As they left the conference room, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his situation had changed. The young deputy who had been mocked as professor was now briefing federal agents and influencing major investigation strategies. But with that recognition came risks he was only beginning to understand. His radio crackled with a routine patrol assignment, and Marcus realized that despite his newfound importance to the task force, he still had to maintain his regular duties. The challenge would be balancing his intelligence-gathering responsibilities with normal police work while staying alert to threats from both criminals and potentially hostile colleagues. As Marcus drove toward his patrol assignment in the East Side District, he passed the warehouse where he had first observed suspicious activity. The white panel van was gone, but he noticed new details that hadn't been visible during his previous surveillance. Fresh tire tracks suggested multiple vehicles had been using the location recently, and there were signs that the building's loading dock had been accessed despite its supposedly abandoned status. Marcus documented these observations carefully, adding them to the growing file of intelligence that was painting an increasingly disturbing picture. Whatever the Torres organization was planning, they were moving closer to implementation. The systematic reconnaissance, the sophisticated counter-surveillance, and the careful operational security all pointed to a criminal enterprise that was prepared to execute a major operation in the very near future. The question was whether law enforcement could uncover their specific plans in time to prevent whatever catastrophe they were preparing to unleash on the community. Marcus had played a crucial role in identifying the threat, but the real test would come when the organization moved from planning to action. As he continued his patrol, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The evidence suggested that the Torres organization was in the final stages of preparation for something significant. Whether law enforcement could stay ahead of their planning and prevent their operation would depend on continued intelligence gathering and careful coordination between local and federal agencies. But Marcus also understood that his role in the investigation had made him a key figure in whatever was about to unfold. The community contacts who trusted him, the intelligence he had gathered, and the analysis he had provided had all positioned him at the center of a rapidly developing situation. For better or worse, the deputy who had been dismissed as an overeducated rookie was about to discover whether his careful, methodical approach to police work could help prevent a major criminal operation from succeeding. The next few days would test not only his investigative skills, but his courage under pressure and his ability to perform when the stakes were highest. Marcus Chun had spent months trying to earn respect from colleagues who value dramatic arrests and street-level confrontations over careful analysis and community engagement. Soon, he would have the opportunity to prove that sometimes the most important police work happens not in dramatic moments of action, but in the quiet, methodical gathering of intelligence that prevents disasters before they can unfold. The call came 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night, 3 days after Marcus's briefing with the federal agents. He was just finishing his patrol shift paperwork when the dispatcher's urgent voice crackled through every radio in the station. All units, shots fired, officer needs assistance, 1400 block of Industrial Boulevard. Multiple suspects, automatic weapons reported. Marcus's blood turned to ice. The 1400 block of Industrial Boulevard was the heart of the district he had been monitoring. The warehouse where he'd first observed suspicious activity was located at 1428 Industrial Boulevard. As he ran toward his patrol car, Marcus could hear additional radio traffic painting an increasingly dire picture. Unit 12, Sergeant Bradley's call sign, was not responding to dispatch attempts at contact. Unit 23, Deputy Morrison, was requesting immediate backup and reporting that he was pinned down by hostile fire. The streets that Marcus had patrolled peacefully for months were now a war zone. Marcus activated his emergency lights and siren, racing toward the scene while listening to fragmented radio communications that suggested a major law enforcement operation had gone catastrophically wrong. As he drove, he tried to piece together what had happened based on the scattered reports he could hear over the radio. Apparently, a planned surveillance operation had been compromised. Bradley and Morrison had been conducting covert observation of the warehouse when they were detected by the Torres organization. What should have been a quiet intelligence-gathering mission had erupted into an active firefight with multiple suspects armed with automatic weapons. As Marcus approached Industrial Boulevard, he could see the flashing lights of emergency vehicles and hear the distinctive sound of automatic gunfire echoing through the industrial district. The scene was chaos. Patrol cars positioned behind cover, deputies taking defensive positions, and the continuous muzzle flashes from inside the warehouse complex indicating that the suspects were well armed and prepared for a prolonged battle. Marcus parked his patrol car 2 blocks from the active scene and approached on foot, using buildings and parked vehicles for cover. The training he had received at the academy had covered active shooter situations and officer rescue scenarios, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of approaching a firefight where his colleagues were trapped and potentially wounded. Deputy Morrison's patrol car was positioned behind a concrete loading dock, its windshield shattered by gunfire. Marcus could see Morrison crouched behind the vehicle, occasionally returning fire toward the warehouse. But there was no sign of Sergeant Bradley or his patrol car. Marcus keyed his radio. "Unit 17 to Unit 23, what's your status?" Morrison's voice came back strained and urgent. "Unit 17, stay back. We've got at least 6 suspects with automatic weapons. Bradley went down somewhere near the warehouse entrance. I can't reach him, and I can't see his position from here." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Bradley was down somewhere in the kill zone, potentially wounded or worse, and Morrison was pinned down and unable to mount a rescue attempt. Additional backup was en route, but in an active firefight, minutes could mean the difference between life and death. Marcus scanned the scene, his mind automatically applying the analytical skills that had made him valuable to the investigation. The warehouse complex consisted of 3 connected buildings with multiple access points. The suspects appeared to be concentrated in the main building, but they had positioned themselves to control the primary approaches to the facility. Bradley's patrol car was visible near the warehouse loading dock, its position suggesting that he had been attempting to get closer to the building when the shooting started. The car appeared to be empty, which meant Bradley was either taking cover somewhere nearby or had been unable to reach safety when the ambush began. The sound of approaching sirens indicated that additional units were arriving, but Marcus realized that by the time a full tactical response could be organized and implemented, it might be too late for Bradley. If the sergeant was wounded and trapped in the open area near the warehouse, he needed immediate assistance. Marcus made a decision that went against every protocol he had learned, but which felt absolutely necessary given the circumstances. Instead of waiting for backup and tactical support, he was going to attempt to locate and rescue Sergeant Bradley. Using his knowledge of the warehouse district's layout, Marcus identified an approach route that would keep him concealed from the main building while allowing him to reach the area where Bradley's patrol car was located. It would require moving through a series of smaller buildings and using industrial equipment for cover, but it offered the best chance of reaching Bradley without exposing himself to direct fire from the warehouse. Marcus checked his equipment: bulletproof vest, sidearm, flashlight, first aid kit, and radio. It wasn't much for a rescue mission in an active firefight, but it was what he had available. More importantly, he had detailed knowledge of the area from months of patrol and intelligence gathering, knowledge that might make the difference in navigating the complex successfully. He began moving toward the warehouse complex, using shadows and industrial structures to mask his approach. The sound of gunfire continued sporadically, with brief exchanges between the suspects and responding officers. Marcus could hear additional radio traffic as more units arrived on scene, but no one seemed to have a clear picture of Bradley's location or status. As Marcus reached the perimeter of the warehouse complex, he could see why the situation had become so dangerous. The Torres organization had turned the facility into a fortress with defensive positions that allowed them to control all primary approaches. This wasn't a spontaneous gun battle. It was a carefully prepared ambush that suggested they had known law enforcement was coming. Marcus felt a chill as he realized the implications. The sophisticated surveillance and counterintelligence capabilities he had identified in his investigation had allowed the organization to detect the planned operation and prepare a deadly trap. His intelligence gathering had identified the threat, but it had apparently come too late to prevent law enforcement from walking into an ambush. Moving carefully through the shadows between buildings, Marcus reached a position where he could see Bradley's abandoned patrol car more clearly. The vehicle had sustained significant damage from gunfire, with multiple bullet holes in the doors and shattered windows. But More importantly, Marcus could now see a figure lying motionless near the vehicle's rear quarter panel. Sergeant Bradley was down, apparently unconscious or worse, in an exposed position where he was vulnerable to continued fire from the warehouse. His position was partially concealed by the patrol car, but anyone attempting a rescue would be exposed to direct fire from multiple directions. Marcus keyed his radio, switching to a tactical channel that would be monitored by all responding units. Unit 17 to command, I have visual on Sergeant Bradley's position. He appears to be down near his patrol car, approximately 50 yards from the main warehouse building. The response came immediately from the incident commander who had assumed control of the scene. Unit 17, maintain your position and do not attempt rescue. We're coordinating tactical response. Marcus understood the protocol, but he also understood that tactical response would take time to organize and implement. Bradley had been down for at least 15 minutes already, and if he was seriously wounded, time was critical. Every minute of delay could be the difference between recovery and permanent disability, or between survival and death. Command, be advised that Sergeant Bradley's position is exposed to continued fire. Immediate extraction may be necessary to prevent further injury. Unit 17, you are ordered to maintain position and await tactical support. Do not approach the target area. Marcus stared at Bradley's motionless form and realized he was facing the most important decision of his law enforcement career. He could follow orders, maintain his position, and wait for tactical support while his sergeant potentially bled to death in an exposed location. Or he could violate direct orders and attempt a rescue that might save Bradley's life but could result in his own death and disciplinary action if he survived. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Tom Bradley had been the first person in the sheriff's department to take Marcus's work seriously, to recognize his value as a police officer, and to give him opportunities to contribute meaningfully to important investigations. Bradley had shown faith in Marcus when everyone else saw only an overeducated rookie who didn't belong on the streets. Marcus checked his equipment one final time and began planning his approach to Bradley's position. The route would require crossing approximately 30 yards of open ground while potentially under fire from multiple positions. It was dangerous, bordering on suicidal, but it was also the only chance Bradley had for immediate rescue. As Marcus prepared to move, he reflected on the irony of his situation. For months, his colleagues had questioned whether he had the courage and commitment necessary for police work. They had seen his academic background and analytical approach as evidence that he was better suited for desk work than street patrol. Now he was about to risk his life in an attempt to rescue the one superior officer who had believed in his potential. Marcus took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and began moving towards Sergeant Bradley's position. He moved in short rushes, using available cover to minimize his exposure to fire from the warehouse. The sound of his movement was masked by ongoing radio chatter and sporadic gunfire, but he knew that once he committed to the final approach across open ground, there would be no concealment. As he reached the last piece of cover before the exposed area around Bradley's patrol car, Marcus could see that the sergeant was indeed wounded. There was blood visible on his uniform, and his position suggested he had been hit while attempting to take cover behind his vehicle. Bradley appeared to be breathing, but he was clearly unconscious and in need of immediate medical attention. Marcus keyed his radio one final time before beginning his rescue attempt. Unit 17 to command, beginning rescue approach to Sergeant Bradley's position. Request immediate medical response and covering fire. Unit 17, you are ordered to abort that approach immediately. Marcus turned off his radio and prepared for the most dangerous 30 yards of his life. In the next few minutes, he would discover whether the courage and commitment his colleagues had questioned were sufficient to save the life of a man who had believed in him when no one else would. The young deputy who had been mocked as professor was about to undertake a rescue mission that would either prove his worth as a police officer or cost him his life. There was no middle ground, no academic theory, and no time for careful analysis. There was only the need to save a good man's life and the courage to risk everything in the attempt. Marcus sprinted toward Bradley's position, his heart pounding with adrenaline and fear, committed to a course of action that would define not only his career, but his understanding of what it meant to be a police officer willing to sacrifice everything for a colleague in need. Marcus ran across the open ground toward Bradley's position with every step, expecting to feel the impact of bullets that would end his rescue attempt and possibly his life. The 30 yards felt like 30 miles as he zigzagged between pieces of debris and industrial equipment, using what little cover was available while automatic weapon fire erupted from multiple positions in the warehouse complex. The sound was deafening, the sharp crack of rifle rounds passing close to his head, the metallic impact of bullets striking concrete and steel around him, and his own labored breathing as adrenaline pushed his body beyond normal limits. Time seemed to slow as Marcus focused entirely on reaching Bradley's position alive and capable of providing assistance. When he finally reached the partial cover provided by Bradley's patrol car, Marcus immediately assessed the sergeant's condition. Bradley was unconscious but breathing, with what appeared to be a gunshot wound to his left shoulder and possible head trauma from either a second gunshot or impact with the vehicle when he fell. Blood loss was significant, but not immediately life-threatening if proper medical care could be provided quickly. Marcus keyed his radio, hoping the incident commander would respond despite his previous orders to abort the rescue attempt. Unit 17 to command, I have reached Sergeant Bradley's position. He is alive, but needs immediate medical evacuation. GSW to the left shoulder, possible head trauma, conscious breathing, but unresponsive. The response came back immediately, and Marcus could hear both relief and anger in the commander's voice. Unit 17, what is your status for extraction? Marcus assessed their tactical situation. The patrol car provided some cover from direct fire, but their position was still exposed to the warehouse complex, and extraction would require either crossing the same open ground Marcus had just traversed or finding an alternative route that wouldn't expose Bradley to additional gunfire during transport. Command, we need covering fire for extraction. Sergeant Bradley cannot move under his own power, and carrying him across open ground will expose both of us to hostile fire. As if to emphasize the point, a burst of automatic weapon fire struck the patrol car, sending glass fragments showering over both officers. Marcus instinctively covered Bradley's body with his own, feeling the sharp sting of glass cuts on his neck and hands. Unit 17, we're coordinating covering fire from Units 23 and 31. When you hear sustained fire from our positions, begin moving toward the staging area. Medical personnel are standing by. Marcus checked Bradley's vital signs again and prepared for the most dangerous part of the rescue. Carrying an unconscious man across 30 yards of open ground while under fire would require not only physical strength, but precise timing and a significant amount of luck. If the covering fire wasn't sufficient, or if he stumbled during the extraction, both officers would likely be killed. Marcus positioned himself to lift Bradley in a fireman's carry, a technique he had learned in academy training, but never imagined using under combat conditions. The sergeant was heavier than Marcus had expected, and the awkward positioning required to protect Bradley's wounded shoulder made the carry more difficult. Unit 17, covering fire commencing in 10 seconds, came the radio call. Marcus took a deep breath, said another prayer, and prepared to commit both their lives to the desperate sprint towards safety. As the sound of covering fire erupted from multiple positions, Marcus lifted Bradley onto his shoulders and began moving as quickly as possible toward the staging area where other officers and medical personnel were waiting. The return trip across the open ground was even more harrowing than his initial approach. Carrying Bradley's weight slowed Marcus significantly, making him a more vulnerable target for the sustained automatic weapon fire coming from the warehouse. He could hear bullets passing close enough to feel the air displacement, and several rounds struck the ground near his feet, sending concrete fragments flying. Deputy Morrison and another officer Marcus didn't recognize were providing covering fire from their positions, their sustained gunfire forcing the warehouse suspects to take cover and reducing the accuracy of return fire. But Marcus knew the covering fire couldn't continue indefinitely, and he needed to reach safety before the suspects regrouped and resumed accurate shooting. 20 yards from safety, Marcus stumbled on a piece of debris and nearly fell. For a terrifying moment, he thought he was going to drop Bradley and expose both of them to direct fire while he struggled to regain control. But somehow he managed to maintain his footing and continue moving toward the staging area where medical personnel were waiting with a stretcher and emergency equipment. As Marcus reached the safety of the staging area, multiple hands reached out to take Bradley from his shoulders and transfer him to medical care. Marcus collapsed to his knees, his body shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline as paramedics immediately began working on Bradley's injuries. "Is he going to be okay?" Marcus gasped, watching the paramedics work. "You got to him in time," one of the paramedics replied without looking up from his work. "Another few minutes, and he might have gone into shock from blood loss." This was good work. As Bradley was loaded into an ambulance and rushed toward the county hospital, Marcus became aware that the shooting at the warehouse had stopped. The sudden silence after nearly an hour of intermittent gunfire was almost as jarring as the initial outbreak of violence had been. The incident commander, a captain from the sheriff's department that Marcus didn't recognize, approached him as he sat recovering from the rescue mission. "Deputy Chun, that was either the bravest thing I've seen in 20 years of police work or the most insubordinate," the captain said, his tone mixing approval with official disapproval. "You directly disobeyed orders to abort your rescue attempt." Marcus struggled to his feet, still breathing heavily from exertion and adrenaline. "Yes, sir. I felt that Sergeant Bradley's life was in immediate danger, and that waiting for tactical support would have resulted in his death." The captain studied Marcus for a long moment. "You realize that your actions could result in disciplinary measures?" "Yes, sir. But Sergeant Bradley is alive, and that's what matters most." Before the captain could respond, Deputy Morrison approached them. Marcus expected another confrontational interaction with a veteran deputy who had mocked him for months, but Morrison's expression was completely different from any Marcus had seen before. "Chun," Morrison said quietly, "that was the most courageous thing I've ever witnessed. You saved Bradley's life, and you did it knowing you might not make it back yourself." The sincerity in Morrison's voice was unmistakable. For the first time since Marcus had joined the department, Morrison was speaking to him with genuine respect rather than condescension or mockery. "Bradley's a good man," Marcus replied simply. "He deserves someone willing to take risks to get him out of there." Morrison nodded slowly. "We all owe you an apology, Chun. We thought you were just some college boy playing cop, but tonight you proved you're more of a police officer than most of us will ever be." As other deputies approached to check on Marcus's condition and express their amazement at his rescue mission, he realized that everything had changed. The mocking nickname Professor was gone, replaced by expressions of genuine respect and admiration. Officers who had previously dismissed him were now seeking him out to offer congratulations and acknowledgement of his courage. Detective Williams arrived at the scene and immediately sought out Marcus. "I heard what you did," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Bradley's going to be okay because you were willing to risk everything to save him." As the scene was secured and investigations began into how the surveillance operation had been compromised, Marcus learned additional details about what had transpired. The Torres organization had indeed detected law enforcement surveillance and prepared an elaborate ambush. Federal agents later determined that the criminal enterprise had been planning a major armed robbery of a federal armored car facility, and the warehouse complex had been their operational headquarters. The intelligence Marcus had gathered through his community contacts and careful analysis had been crucial in identifying the threat, even though it hadn't prevented the ambush that nearly cost Bradley his life. Without Marcus's work, law enforcement might never have discovered the scope of the Torres organization until after they had successfully completed their planned robbery. 3 days later, Marcus visited Bradley in the county hospital. The sergeant was recovering well from his injuries, though he would need several weeks of rehabilitation before returning to full duty. When Marcus entered the hospital room, Bradley's face lit up with a smile. "There's my guardian angel," Bradley said, struggling to sit up straighter in his hospital bed. "The doctors tell me you saved my life out there." Marcus felt embarrassed by the praise. "I just did what any officer would do for a colleague." "No, Bradley replied firmly. Most officers would have followed orders and waited for tactical support. You made a decision to risk your own life because you believed mine was worth saving. That's not something most people would do, regardless of their training or experience." Bradley's expression grew more serious. "Marcus, I want you to understand something. When I first met you 8 months ago, I saw potential that wasn't being recognized by others in the department. Your academic background, your analytical skills, and your approach to community engagement were exactly what modern police work needs." Marcus listened intently as Bradley continued. "But what I couldn't evaluate from your file or our conversations was whether you had the courage and commitment necessary for police work. Some people can analyze problems and develop theories, but they can't act decisively when lives are on the line." Bradley paused, his voice becoming emotional. What you did 3 nights ago proved that you have not only the intellectual capabilities for exceptional police work, but also the courage to act when everything is at stake. You're going to have a remarkable career in law enforcement." As Marcus prepared to leave the hospital, Bradley had one final comment. "By the way, the department is recommending you for a commendation for bravery. And I heard that Morrison has been telling everyone who will listen that you're the best deputy in the department." Marcus smiled at the irony. Morrison, who had been his most persistent critic, had become one of his strongest supporters after witnessing his rescue mission. The veteran deputy who had mocked Marcus as professor was now praising him as a genuine police officer who had proven his worth under the most demanding circumstances. When Marcus returned to work the following week, he found that his status within the department had undergone a complete transformation. Officers who had previously ignored or dismissed him now sought his opinions on investigations and patrol strategies. The academic background that had once been seen as a liability was now viewed as valuable expertise that enhanced his law enforcement capabilities. During the morning briefing, the sheriff himself appeared to personally thank Marcus for his heroic actions and to announce that his intelligence work had been instrumental in disrupting a major criminal organization. The Torres enterprise had been dismantled with multiple arrests and the prevention of what would have been a significant armed robbery. As Marcus listened to the sheriff's praise and the applause from his colleagues, he reflected on how dramatically his situation had changed. 9 months earlier, he had been a rookie deputy struggling to earn basic acceptance from colleagues who questioned his commitment to police work. Now he was being praised as a hero whose courage and analytical skills had saved lives and prevented major crimes. But the real satisfaction came not from the official recognition or the changed attitudes of his colleagues. It came from knowing that he had lived up to his own standards of what it meant to be a police officer. When faced with the choice between personal safety and risking his life to save a colleague, Marcus had chosen courage over caution. The young man who had been mocked for his gentle nature and academic background had proven that true strength comes not from projecting toughness, but from acting with courage when courage is needed most. Marcus Chun had saved Sergeant Bradley's life, but in doing so, he had also saved his own sense of purpose and belonging in a profession that would always demand the best of those who chose to serve. As he prepared for another day of patrol in the community he had sworn to protect, Marcus understood that respect earned through courage and sacrifice was far more valuable than respect demanded through authority or intimidation. He had found his place in law enforcement not by changing who he was, but by proving that who he was, careful, analytical, and deeply committed to protecting others, was exactly what the job required. The deputy they had mocked as professor had become the officer they now called hero. And in saving his commander's life, Marcus Chun had discovered that sometimes the greatest victories come not from being accepted by others, but from accepting yourself as worthy of the badge you wear and the oath you took to serve and protect.